Why, hello there, my fellow nature nuts. It's a beautiful day to be alive, so let's get started.
Whether it be in the grassy meadows or the redwood forest, we here in Santa Cruz are incredibly lucky to have an amazing diversity of predatory birds gracing our blue skies every day. Since there are so many raptors out there, it can start to feel pretty overwhelming when trying to figure out an ID. It takes practice, but it also takes some special tools. So today, I'm going to introduce you to some of those methods that birders use to distinguish raptors from one another.
Then we'll apply them to the most common order of predatory birds in this area, accipitiforms, or hawks and eagles. So hopefully after seeing this video, when you see a figure soaring overhead, you'll have some tools to figure out exactly what it is.
This here is the avian taxonomic tree. Looks pretty complicated, right? Don't worry, there won't be a test on this. Plus, we're only looking right here.
Accipitiforms, hawks and eagles. There are other predatory birds around here such as falcons, owls, and vultures, but we're not going to be talking about those ones today. Take a look here at some individuals. This isn't just hawks and eagles, but actually a lot of different predatory birds mixed together. What do you notice about them? What do they all have in common? What's different? Can you recognize any of these? It's okay if you can't, but hopefully by the end of this video, you have a better understanding of these birds and how to tell them apart. So before we get into specific raptors, let's talk about how to spot them in the first place. This is where we're going to have to engage all our senses. We need to open up our field of vision, engage our peripherals, and use our owl eyes to spot those raptors. Look for commotion. This here is a video I took recently of some crows diving a juvenile red-tailed hawk. This is what we call mobbing. Often if you see a lot of attention being directed towards a certain branch or a bird flying above, it's likely a raptor. Now we have to engage our hearing and listen to the world around us with our deer ears. Raptors are often fairly silent, but the birds around them will not be when they spot that predator soaring overhead. Birds will often send up an alarm whenever a predator comes by, creating a cacophony of very abrasive calls. Sometimes this is followed by complete silence if the predator is very near and the birds don't want to expose their location. In general, if you hear or see a lot of commotion from the birds in the area, look for the cause. It might just be a raptor. So now let's get into those tips and tricks I promised y'all for what to look for when identifying raptors. The first and possibly most important one is the overall shape or silhouette of the bird. A lot of times you only get a quick backlit glimpse of the bird, so you'll need to get a general sense of the bird's shape. Size is often not a great thing to rely on since birds may be closer or farther away, making it hard to determine how big they are. But shape is always present. It's best to look at the wings, tail, and head for their shape and length in comparison to the body. Flight behavior is another really good thing to look for. Larger birds like eagles and vultures will often soar on thermals or uplifts of warm air, only flapping their wings occasionally. Smaller hawks will engage in a flap-flap-glide sort of flight. You won't see them soaring as often.
Habitat and location is also a good thing to take note of, as different groups are specialized towards different styles of living. Some like the forest, like the red-shouldered hawk, while others prefer hunting over grassy fields like the red-tailed hawk and the white-tailed kite. Field marks! There are so many different... Dang it, Greg. Did you change the diagram again? Sorry about that, folks. Give me a second here. Alright. There we go. I really had to fire Greg. Alright, so where were we? Field marks. So looking here, this may seem really daunting, but in reality, we only really need to focus on these areas here. These are common areas where raptors can vary a lot, which helps us in identification. On the underside, we pay attention to the axillaries, or the wing pits, which are essentially the equivalent of our armpits. The patagium is a stretch of skin between the shoulder and the wrist of the bird's wing. I'll also call it the leading edge of the wing sometimes. This area is especially critical for identifying red-tailed hawks, as we'll see soon. The chest and the belly are pretty self-explanatory, and the carpal is the wrist area. On the back side here, we have the rump, bird booty as I like to call it, and wing panel, which is a pale spot of light that is present on some birds when backlit. I like to think of it as a little window to the sky.
Now I know you're probably thinking, oh, enough with this field mark stuff. Let's talk about some actual birds. Well, here we go. So we're going to start out with eagles. These birds are going to be some of the largest we have in the area, with long wings and visible fingers, or primary feathers. Eagles also tend to have long, broad tails with a large head, beak, and overall build. The first of our eagles is probably the most iconic one here in the United States, the bald eagle. These birds have quite the honker of a yellow beak and giant bright yellow feet. Adults have a white head and tail with dark brown plumage everywhere else. Here we have a picture of an adult and a juvenile, or a young bird in its immature stage. These birds will be about the same size, but their plumage will be very different, even though they're the same species. Notice the speckling of white on the chest of the juvenile, as well as the white in the wing pits. This is characteristic of a young bald eagle. These massive birds are almost exclusively fish-eating, so they're only found near bodies of water. Around here you can sometimes see them fishing over the creeks and rivers that flow out to the ocean. Ah, so majestic. The symbol of our strong nation. A beacon of, okay, maybe not when walking. He kind of looks like a grandfather with his britches all pulled up to his chest. Okay, well, the sound that they make has to be cool, right? I mean, like, we've all seen those clips in the movies with the eagle and, okay, maybe not when calling either. Let's move on? Yeah, let's move on, shall we? Now we have the golden eagle. Not a common bird, but more abundant than the bald eagle around here. In comparison to the bald eagle, these massive birds have just a slightly longer wingspan, and the adults are a deep brown all over. Their beaks are slightly smaller than the bald eagles, and it's a slightly duller yellow color with a black tip. So now look at the juvenile. What do you notice? Does it look pretty similar to something else? The young bald eagle, maybe? We'll go over the differences in a second. The golden eagle is a more generalist hunter than the bald eagle, though they do prefer small mammals, which they can grab with their huge talons. They're pretty amazing to see in flight, and lucky for us, there's a few breeding pairs that call Santa Cruz their home. As mentioned before, these species tend to look very similar in their juvenile forms. The best way to tell these two apart is the golden eagles will primarily have white patches around the wrist area, while bald eagles have white in the wing pits and along the underside of the wing. So now let's move on to what most people tend to think of when they think of a raptor. No, not velociraptors. Though technically birds are just evolved dinosaurs, so I guess that's not entirely wrong. But no, I'm talking about hawks. There are two genera that make up what we consider hawks, Bootios and accipiters. Bootios tend to have long, broad wings, a short, broad tail, and a thick body, also known as the relatively flat leading edge of the wing. Arguably the most well-known of the Bootios in North America is the red-tailed hawk. Identification of this species centers around their dark patagial marks on the leading edge of the wing, as well as the white chest, contrasting with a brown belly band. We call this a medallion, and it's often able to be seen from a far distance. When people hear of a red-tailed hawk, of course the first thing that they think about is a red tail, but this isn't actually the best feature to go off of. Look at these images of a juvenile red-tailed hawk. Where's the red tail? This trait doesn't come until the birds have reached their adult form. Can you think of any reason why?
We'll talk about that a little more in a bit, so just keep it in the back of your mind for now.
Along with the juvenile plumage variation, the adult form can also vary with lots of different morphs. However, these patagial marks are always going to be there, so even without the red tail, you can still identify this as a red-tailed hawk. That's why it's such a good field mark. These amazing generalist predators eat anything from rodents to large invertebrates, even bats sometimes. They've adapted pretty well to humans messing with things. Like eagles, they steadily soar on thermals and flap very little. Now let's hear that call. There we go, that's what we were looking for. That's what we hear in the movies. Pretty cool, right? The red-shouldered hawk is next. As the name suggests, the adults have red on their backs and shoulders, but also their belly and chest. They also have a yellow beak with a black tip. The wings and tail feathers have a striking black and white striped pattern that is especially obvious in flight. But what do you notice about the juvenile? It looks pretty similar to the red-tailed hawk juvenile, right? Why do you think that is? Can you think of any possible reasons as to why they look so similar? Although they are Bootios, these birds are what we consider kind of an in-between Bootio and accipiter, because it's shaped like a Bootio, but they live in forested areas like an accipiter. You won't see these birds soaring as often as you'll see them flitting between trees. But when it is soaring above, you'll be able to see a noticeable wing panel. Red-tailed hawks don't have this, so that's another identifier between the two. These birds are also very vocal at times. Listen here. Sorry, I had to cut him off there. He would have just kept going. Pretty loud, right? Now here's the underside of both a red-shouldered hawk and a red-tailed hawk. Notice those field marks that we were talking about. That wing panel on the red-shouldered hawk, and the patagial marks on the red-tailed hawk.
Now let's move on to our accipiters. They are forest-living birds that flit between trees using a flat flap glide flight behavior. They have short, paddle-like wings, a longer, thinner tail than bootios, and a slender body. Their overall compact shape is very well suited to dodging between trees, catching birds and small mammals with their sharp talons.
Take a second to look closely at these birds. Looks like the same species, right? Now this is why I think nature has a sense of humor. At first glance you think these are the same bird, but they aren't. Though closely related, these are separate species. The Cooper's hawk on the right, sharp-shinned hawk on the left.
The Cooper's hawk is the largest accipiter in this area, only slightly smaller than the red-tailed hawk. The tail is very long compared to the body, and has a slight curved end. Adults have red barring on their chest, and a dark gray cap, or top of the head, a light gray neck, and a blue-gray back. They have stunning red eyes that contrast greatly with their dark plumage. The juveniles, on the other hand, are white with brown streaking. Look familiar again? We saw this same juvenile plumage in the bootios. Did you think of any reasons as to why they may be so similar? It has to be advantageous in some way, right? Well, it is. It helps the juveniles blend in better with their surroundings until they're better flyers and can fully fend for themselves. This, on the other hand, is a sharp-shinned hawk, and plumage-wise, it looks almost exactly like the Cooper's hawk. However, there are some noticeable differences that we can use in identification, mainly in those areas that we talked about in the beginning of this video. First off, the Cooper's hawk is much bigger than the sharp-shinned hawk. You can really see the size difference in this photo. The sharp-shinned hawk is in between robin and crow sized, and is about half the size of a Cooper's hawk. This is slightly hard to determine when the birds aren't side by side, but it's still good to be aware of. Another thing to look for, especially if the bird is perched and you have some binoculars handy, is the head shape. The sharp-shinned hawk would have what we consider a dark hood, meaning a dark gray color from the top of the head and down the neck, while the Cooper's hawk has a dark cap, which is a dark gray just on the top of the head and a lighter gray on the neck. Also, someone once told me that a sharp-shinned hawk looks pretty bug-eyed, like they just saw a ghost, while the Cooper's hawk always looks a little angry with that strong brow. In flight, the shape of the birds is fairly different. The Cooper's hawk will have its wrist about even with its shoulder, creating a flat leading edge, while the sharp-shinned hawk will have the wrists pushed forward, almost like they're shrugging. I like to think Sharpies shrug to remember this trait. Birders will often look at the tail shape as well. The Cooper's hawk has a curved tail tip, and the sharp-shinned has a flat tail tip. To remember this, I add on to that mnemonic: Sharpies shrug straight. One final way to separate out these two species is their flight pattern. Since the Cooper's hawk is fairly big with large wings, it doesn't need to flap often to maintain altitude. The sharp-shinned hawk, on the other hand, is smaller and flaps a lot more. A trick to remember this is if you can count the number of wing beats out loud, it's a Cooper's hawk. If not, it's a sharp-shinned hawk. And that's all I have for today for the most common hawks and eagles in Santa Cruz area. I hope you learned something today about identifying raptors, but most of all, I hope this inspires you to get out there and spot some birds. Thanks for watching!
People wanna hear a good song. People don't